today we are having a conversation with Celia Zhang. Celia is a professional violinist in the Boston area and has recently expanded her violin studio to become the Village Youth Conservatory. And this conservatory is now offering lessons for everything from guitar to bass to ukulele, and they're expanding their selection all the time. I'm delighted to introduce her today, and without further ado, Celia Zhang.
All right, so Celia, I've read up a little bit about you, but for the folks at home, can you give us just a little bit about you?
Sure. So I grew up primarily in Louisville, Kentucky. I did my college degree at the Juilliard School for Violin Performance. Afterwards, I went to the Yale School of Music for my master's. After that, I moved here to Boston, which is where I currently am. And it was like the first, example of like real world living after school.
Yeah.
So it was a big mix of like teaching and performing. And just as life went on, I just found myself more and more drawn to the teaching side. I started my own studio. And then recently I evolved my studio, Celia Zhang Violin, based off my name, into my new school called Village Youth Conservatory. And so that's where I am now. That's
I like it. Out of curiosity, you mentioned, of course, the Celia Zhang Violin, that's where, the name came from. Where did the Village Conservatory name come from, if you don't mind my asking?
No, not at all. So I feel like a big component of the learning experience is just the support of a community. And I've always liked that expression of it takes a village to raise a child and so on. So village came from that. Plus, I'm kind of near Newton Village in Massachusetts, so it's just
Okay.
a play application.
Makes sense.
Youth
I gotcha.
because, yeah.
Oh, nice. So, tell me about your work with the Village Youth Conservatory. What inspired you? You started off with your violin studio there in Boston. Yeah, at what point did you say, you know what, we're going to evolve here?
So, relaying back to like my own experiences growing up, I do recall that a lot of, the private lesson experience can be very like one-on-one, you practice by yourself. It could be a little bit isolating after a while.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the whole experience of music, because a big part of like the music education program, of performance degrees and so on, is like doing chamber music and orchestras and so on. So I wanted to be able to offer a way where students can experience that side of it in addition to, not just right, I'm gonna play my scales, I'm gonna
Gotcha.
practice one-on-one.
So you're kind of taking that traditional one-on-one teaching, but you're actually sort of growing it into more of a communal experience.
Right, exactly. And I
Oh, I
couldn't do
love
that
that.
from my current location. So
Phenomenal. I love that. That's so interesting. Yeah. So how did you come to partner with the other teachers there at the Village Conservatory there? Are these other folks that you knew from college? Are these just other folks in the area?
there are other folks in the area. I specifically recruited searching for a couple of criteria, the main one being just straight up passion for sharing. I think sometimes, it can definitely be like personality myth how like a student and a teacher like chemically
Yeah.
chemically, how
I'll take that.
how
Sure.
they
Yeah.
mesh together.
Yeah.
How they react to each other and so on. So being able to like present something that can be daunting, like learning an instrument can be daunting, but to present it in like an appetizing and like appealing way for students, which also varies by each student's personality and background experience. It's a lot of adapting and a lot of sharing that passion. So those are the two main things I really wanted to have all my teachers like
Nice.
bring to the plate.
Gotcha. So you went out into the area and just said, look, these are the features I'm looking for. Come join me in this Village Conservatory.
Exactly.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I did notice, you had the violin studio first, but the conservatory covers all kinds of instruments. I mean, everything from ukulele to guitar to everything. And my assumption is just you're gunning for music for everybody. Is that
Yes.
accurate? Is that why
Yes.
you ended up expanding those instrument selection?
Yes, I don't want people to get the impression that I only like classical music, and that's like the only way to go or anything. I feel like music can come from like any genre. Like people love pop, people like folk, and so on. So I don't want our school to feel like it's limited to just classical, just piano, just violin, or anything like
Nice.
that. So I want to be really inclusive, and it's really just a community
I like that.
location.
So that being said, so the focus is not just on classical. I assume other teachers are doing other genres. Do you have like
Yes.
rock teachers, blues teachers, that sort of thing?
They all are quite flexible, honestly. When I like interviewed with them and spoke with them as well, I was like, "Are you like looking to teach a certain criteria or a certain category and so on, they're like, I love it all. And so
I'm here to teach anything you want.
exactly.
Nice.
Exactly. So whatever the students are drawn towards, we're happy to like bring that into the fold and
Nice.
incorporate
Okay.
that.
As long as they're interested in music, you can do something with that.
Yes.
Nice. All right, cool. So, on the website, the Village Conservatory, you use the phrase growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. Could you expand on the idea of that growth mindset? And do you think that music becomes more accessible to a broader range of people when you do that growth mindset versus the fixed?
Yeah, so the actual terminology of growth mindset, I didn't even learn myself until a couple of years ago.
Okay.
But once I heard it, I was like, oh, that's what that thing is. So for like anyone who doesn't know, growth mindset is essentially the attitude. I think it's an attitude where a student's potential or a talent is not necessarily like preset or predisposed or anything. It's something that constantly evolves based off like feedback and effort, and like it's something that evolves with the
Gotcha.
learning
So
process.
you're kind of going against that grain of, this person just has the natural talent, and so
Yeah.
boom, like they're already here, and this is where we're gonna
Right.
pump this guy up to fame, whereas everybody
Yeah.
else, you weren't born with this, so
Right.
choose
That's
something
just
else.
so excluding and very not, I don't think, what music's actually about. It's also just, I think the idea of a fixed mindset, which is the opposite, where you're set a certain way, is just not fair. Because that's just not true. Like so many people can like have a great like innate ability, but then not have the work ethic to support that, or vice
Yeah.
versa. They may have like be really passionate about it, but may not necessarily have like perfect pitch or something. That doesn't mean that either one should or shouldn't be able to succeed in the field
Right.
if they chose to.
Oh, I
Right.
like that.
So
Yeah. So March is Women's History Month, and I'm very curious. Can you tell us a little bit about the women who have inspired you and who have motivated you to do what you do?
yes, absolutely. Love Women's History Month, by the way. Just putting that out there.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
So I've had a lot of amazing influences in my life. I'm really lucky to have had not just access, but like exposure to the people who I've grown up with, many of whom were my teachers.
Mhm.
One of the earliest ones I've had was this lady, Hua Jin. She's currently in the Indianapolis Symphony, but back then she was just also like finding her footing in America. She's from China initially. Yeah, China, sorry. I
all
had to
good.
double check that. And she grew up similar to my mom during the Cultural Revolution in China,
Oh, wow.
where like a lot of the cultural references and like Western influenced things were like not allowed and so on.
Mhm.
So that's a whole other way to have grown up
Yeah,
learning music
wow.
when you weren't supposed to.
No
First of
kidding.
all.
Wow.
And she probably was also the first person to introduce me to the idea of like, if you do a good job, you get points. And then you get more points, which then earns to like, like more of an incentive that's more blatant rather than just like feeling good when you're like 6 years old, which is
Sure.
tough, you know?
So she gave
So
she
she's,
was the first one to kind of give you that the reward system.
yes. And she's
Okay.
just also been like, she's always been a family friend, and she's like my violin mom. She's just incredible.
That's wonderful.
And clearly, amazing person. After that, my family moved from Indiana at the time to Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I primarily grew up. There, I had two teachers who were like remarkable. The first one was Ruth French. She was the president of the first place I ever knew could be a music school, Louisville Academy of Music.
Okay.
And she was just incredible. She was versatile. She was very friendly, and she was just like that home environment in music that I've like just always admired and thought that was incredible. So that was a huge influence as well. And after her, because like logistical family stuff,
Sure.
essentially, we had another teacher, Gloria Spurlock, and she was the one who introduced me to the whole pedagogical system of like Juilliard, Dorothy DeLay, Ivan Galamian, and this whole like ancient, not ancient, it's not really ancient, but this whole grand like hierarchy of like violin pedagogy and that world
The
and how like
grand
influenced technique.
history
Yeah,
of violin
exactly.
pedagogy. Sure. Wow.
Like the king and queens of ancient violin worlds and so on. But
Yes. King
to
Galamian.
like a
Yes.
10-year-old, yeah. To like a 10-year-old, I was just like, wow, there's so much history. And so like to learn about like that side of the technique and about like the methodologies and so on was hugely influential to like how I like actually grew and cultivated my skills and so on. So that was huge, to
Phenomenal.
put it
It
briefly.
sounds like they were all very, again, like very nurturing and very, open-minded as far as, who can play what. And it sounds like you're taking a lot of those ideas from them into this Village Conservatory.
Yes, definitely. I think without any of those three factors, I don't think I could have made the school what it is. And of course, there's been additional influences beyond that too, but that'll just make this video very, very long. And then of course, my mom,
Of course. Yep.
of course, if she didn't exist, I wouldn't exist. Even beyond that, she's just also grew up in the Cultural Revolution. She grew up in a time where men were prioritized over women in terms of education, in terms of resources, who got even clothing and food sometimes. Not that
Wow.
just that was the mentality of that culture back then. And so for her to have grown up and even have to put her education on hold to be a farmer because the government required you to go learn about farmlands after high school,
Wow.
that kind of an environment, it's just so different. There was a
Yeah.
whole decade where people could not go to college. There was no option to go to college. You were instead carted off to the countryside to do farm work. And so to live in an environment like that where bright, countless, men and women, that was their future that they were facing
Yeah.
when they probably aspired for more, is just so. She also taught my sisters and I to just never take education for granted, to always seize every opportunity, work hard, you only get one childhood, one developmental phase, make the most of it. So that's also obviously a tremendous factor toward everything.
Yeah.
So
No, that's incredible. The student and parent testimonials on your website, they showcase a balance of fun and discipline for that student's practice. But what are some of your methods for managing that balance between fun and work? Fun
I
and
think keeping in mind,
practice.
I think keeping in mind the fact that music is not meant to be, I mean, it can be used as a regimented discipline method, sure, but it's meant to be an expression. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be cathartic and an outlet for people. So keeping that in mind while we do the practice and development is, I think, really important to keep in perspective for students. Another one that I do that's based off teachers' influences again
Yeah.
is just using metaphors, using imagery that the students can relate to. Because obviously they're mostly very young. They probably haven't experienced much of the world yet. So to create some kind of image for them to relate to, I personally resort a lot, a ridiculous amount, to Harry Potter metaphors.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And they usually get that right away.
That's
Even the really young ones. It's amazing.
Could you give me an example out of curiosity? I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, so some of the students, I challenge them with producing a really strong sound quality and tone, so it's not just blah, but it's it's
Yeah.
more 3D tone quality. And I just relate that to when Harry first produced his Patronus and he was working with Lupin for all these lessons, and it's just it took a long time. He was obviously frustrated, and there were all these approaches, and then when he finally got even an inkling of it, it was just so exciting. And he
Yeah.
wanted to
I
propel
love
further.
Yeah. That's so funny. I love that analogy.
And they all know the analogy too.
Yeah.
I've
No,
seen that
the minute
movie.
you started talking about the Patronus, I was like, oh yeah, no, he finally practices that thing for ages, and I get it.
And then at the end of the movie, he's able to produce this ridiculous Patronus that yields off a gazillion. I mean, I'm hoping I'm not spoiling it for any kids who watch it, but
It's years old at this point. We'll put
so-
something in the description.
when that happens, yeah, it's just you can see the evolution of his orientation towards it, and it's something that is it worth it? Absolutely, he uses it for years.
Yeah.
And metaphorically, it's very similar to what we do. I mean, less life-threatening, but it's very similar to what we do
Yeah.
on our end with music. And so it's just something that I find really relates to the kids.
I mean, it works. It works. You were halfway through the Patronus story, and I knew exactly where you were going with that. I love that.
Perfect.
All right, so you've had a lot of impressive benchmarks as a musician. You made your solo debut at 9 years old, right? And as well as I think it was at 14 you debuted with which symphony was
Louisville Orchestra. Louisville Orchestra.
The Louisville
It's the
Orchestra.
first professional orchestra, yeah.
Right. So, out of curiosity, is there any one accomplishment that really is highlighted in your head? Is there any one accomplishment
Yes.
that you're like, this is what I love?
The one that really sticks out to my mind is when I was admitted to Juilliard, and the reason's not because that college was the highlight of my life, it
Sure.
wasn't, but mostly because like it was such a long and slow burn. Like when I first like my journey towards Juilliard started when I was 9,
Yeah.
actually. So what happened was I was at a school where I was in the chorus. The teacher knew I played violin, and we had a concert. So she was like, "Hey, Celia, would you like to perform a piece on a concert?" I'm like, "Okay, sure." So I did, and one of the audience members was one of my classmates' mom, whose daughter, my classmate, also played violin, and so she like knew like, oh, this is not the kid who plays your instrument, and she's an incredible lady. But like at the end of the performance, when I was going home with my parents, she like came up to us and was like, I was literally crying as you played.
Aw.
And I was like, oh, thank you. And she was like you're doing great, keep it up, keep up the great work, someday we'll see you at Juilliard. And I was like, thank you. And like she laughed. Like my parents was like, what's Juilliard?
Juilliard?
I literally
Who's
had no idea.
Juilliard?
Who is this person they speak of? And so my parents were like, it's actually this music school in New York. It's one of the best in the world. All other famous violinists, like Seth Perlman, the people you admire, they've all gone to that school. And like, if you work hard someday, maybe you can go there.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I will. And they're like, that's cute. Like, when people are like, oh, I'm going to be president someday. And parents are
Yep.
like, oh, that's great.
Oh, I'm sure
it was
you
like
will. I'm
that.
sure you're going to
Exactly.
become president, little guy. Yeah.
It was like exactly that kind of situation. I was just like, they don't believe me.
I'll show you
I like
guys.
start plotting. And so basically between 9 and 17, I guess it was, when the results came out, like my girl was just like, Julia.
I gotta
And like
prove
my
them
parents
wrong.
were just like, exactly. And my parents were like, she's serious. Oh, she's really done into music. And stuff like that. So that was just like something that just really stuck out because it was such a long and slow burn towards
Yeah.
it.
And then finally
but
getting
it was-
that acceptance letter after nearly a decade of.
I literally was like screaming around the house for like 10 minutes straight after I saw the email. I was just like, I couldn't even like read the full email. I was like small doses. I was just like, for like a really long time. My parents were like, are you really? I'm like, yes, I got it.
It'll be fine.
So-
It'll be fine. I gotta get this out of my system. Got accepted to Juilliard.
Yeah, that's why that was such a pinnacle in my life because I was just like, it's been literally half my life. So
That's incredible.
that stuck out.
So, my last question for you today is: part of a teaching practice is giving advice to your students, right?
Yes.
Do you have any, sort of universal pieces of advice for any sort of musician who is, I guess, any sort of person who is on the road to becoming a musician? Do you have any general advice for them?
Yeah, so a piece of advice my dad gave me once, and I was like, oh, sure. But it actually was very, very true, was that education is just never wasted. So even if it's not music, if you take the time to learn outside things in addition to the music to supplement it, it's also going to be a huge boost to one's career, I think. Like for me, yes, I practiced a lot. Severely, but
Sure.
I read the Harry Potter series, and now I find that a very effective way to implement into my teaching. For instance, it wasn't wasted. Even if I watched the movies like 8 times in a row, it was all useful. And then, for instance, afterwards, life happened. I'm like doodling about personal finance. That was also a big help in learning how to handle a school, learning how to build my own website. That was totally helpful for the school again.
You built your own website for your violin studio or for the Village Conservatory? Both?
Both.
Oh wow!
Yes.
Jeez.
I used a platform. I mean, the platform definitely made it easier,
Sure.
but even just
Building
figuring
a
out how to do layout.
even with a platform, building websites, that is an involved process. So that's interesting, phenomenal.
It is, yeah. And then even just back in school when you learn about physics and science and math, those are actually huge aspects of music. How to produce a sound quality is physics,
Yep.
right? It's very relevant. And then fractions, rhythm, it all goes together. So
There is so much math going on in music that people just don't realize initially.
polyrhythms, so
Polyrhythms.
annoying,
Yep.
but so useful. Exactly. So there's just nothing that you'll learn that would go to waste, I think. And
I
it's
think
important.
that is wise
Band.
as all get out. Education is never wasted. And I
Yeah.
think it's important, to point out the fact that, in the same answer, you're talking about the sciences, you're talking about math, and you're talking about Harry Potter. And I think that's important, honestly. I think the sciences and the fantasy, the way that you've sort of married those together to teach people, education's never wasted. I love that.
Yeah. And it was a long lesson to learn.
Yeah.
But it's very, very true, though.
Yeah.
I hate to admit it. Dad was right. Teaching the watches and be like,
We'll
it was great.
we'll leave this unlisted. Don't worry.
Trim that part out. Good part where I admitted it.
We can't let them know. It's all good. I'm with you. All right, Celia, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so very much for joining me here. I love this conversation, and I wish you all of the best with the Youth Village Conservatory there, the Village Youth Conservatory there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really loved getting to share everything.
We'll have to do this again sometime, Celia. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Folks, thanks for joining us for this interview. I had a blast chatting with Celia. I learned a bit, I had fun, and I hope you did too. If you're interested, Celia offered a list of products that she can recommend from Shar Music, and you can find all those in the description below. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here next time. Remember, like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell. We'll see you next time.